The strobe lights of the police cruiser were doing fascinating things to the epoxy. Under normal circumstances, red and blue flashing lights at 2:14 a.m. signal a catastrophe. A break-in, a domestic dispute, a cat stuck in a storm drain. But in the manicured, sterilized, beige-worshipping dystopia of Oak Creek Estates, the lights signaled something far more dangerous. A man with a vision. I stood in the center of my driveway, wearing nothing but a pair of basketball shorts, tactical safety goggles, and a t-shirt that said, "I'm not arguing, I'm just explaining why I'm right." In my right hand, I held a Burns-O-Matic TS8000 high-intensity blowtorch. In my left, I clutched a 5-pound bag of industrial-grade holographic glitter. Across from me, using the hood of their cruiser as a shield, stood two of Oak Creek's finest. "Sir," the older officer said. His name tag read, Miller. No relation, though I felt a sudden distinct kinship with anyone forced to deal with this level of nonsense at this hour. "I need you to extinguish the flame, and put down the—" "Is that sand?" "It's not sand, Officer Miller," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the hum of the cruiser's engine. "It is ultrafine, solvent-resistant polyester glitter. Shade. Galactic Unicorn Sneeze. And the flame is necessary. It pops the microbubbles. If I don't pop the bubbles, the structural integrity of the seal is compromised. You don't want a compromised seal, do you? That's how the water gets in. That's how the freeze-thaw cycle destroys the American dream." Officer Miller looked at his partner. His partner, a younger guy named Hernandez, was staring at the ground. He looked like he'd just eaten a hallucinogenic mushroom. "Sir," Hernandez said, his voice trembling slightly, "why is the ground pulsing?" I looked down. He was right. It was magnificent. To the uninitiated, it might have looked like a radioactive spider had spun a web across the entirety of my 30-foot driveway. But to me, it was victory. The fissures in the concrete, hundreds of them, spider-webbing out from the center where the original contractor had clearly cut corners on the rebar, were no longer jagged scars. They were veins of pure, unadulterated neon. I had filled them with a self-leveling epoxy resin mixed with a phosphorescent pigment called Chernobyl lime and electric violence purple. And because I had just hit them with the UV flashlight to check the cure, they were glowing. The entire driveway looked like the nervous system of a cyberpunk god. "It's photoluminescent pigment, Officer Hernandez," I explained, taking a step forward. "Stay back," Miller barked, hand hovering near his holster. "Do not advance with the torch." "I'm just popping bubbles," I yelled, perhaps a little too manic. I clicked the trigger off, the blue flame hissing into silence. "Look, the torch is off. Safety first. I'm not a maniac. I'm a homeowner." Miller relaxed, but only slightly. He walked around the front of the cruiser, his boots crunching on the pristine asphalt of the street. Asphalt that was boring, black, and frankly lacking in soul. He stopped at the edge of my driveway, treating the curb like a demarcation line between sanity and madness. "We got a call," Miller said, pulling out a notepad. "Let me guess," I said, adjusting my goggles. "Brenda?" Miller didn't answer, which was an answer. "We received a complaint regarding suspicious activity, potential arson, and—" he squinted at his notes, tilting the paper toward the flashing lights. "Creating a visual hazard for low-flying aircraft." I snorted. "Low-flying aircraft? We're 10 miles from the airport, Miller. Unless Brenda Vance is expecting a drone strike on her hydrangeas, I think we're safe." "The caller stated you were," Miller continued, reading verbatim, "conducting a satanic ritual involving glowing slime and fire." "It's resin," I gestured broadly at the masterpiece beneath my feet. It's high-performance, 2-part epoxy resin, and it's not satanic. It's kintsugi. Kin what now? Hernandez asked, stepping up beside Miller. He was still mesmerized by the floor. He scuffed the toe of his boot near a particularly bright vein of lime green. Kintsugi, I repeated. It's the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer. The idea is to treat the breakage and repair as part of the history of the object, rather than something to disguise. You embrace the flaws, you highlight them, you make the scars beautiful. You made the scars neon purple, Hernandez noted. I modernized the aesthetic. Miller shone his flashlight onto the driveway. The beam danced across the surface. The epoxy had settled perfectly into the cracks, creating a smooth, glass-like surface that was flush with the concrete. It was seamless. It was professional. It was incredibly, aggressively loud. Is this permanent? Miller asked. God, I hope so, I said. It's rated for 10,000 psi. You could drive a tank over this. In fact, if the rest of the concrete fails, this epoxy skeleton will probably remain standing. It will be the only thing left after the apocalypse. Just this neon web and the cockroaches. Miller rubbed his temples. Sir, it's 2:00 a.m. You're outside with a blowtorch. The cure time is critical, officer. Humidity rises at dawn. If I don't get the glitter layer down before the dew point hits, I get clouding. Do you know what clouding does to a holographic finish? It ruins the depth. It makes it look cheap. I didn't spend $400 on pigment to have it look cheap. You spent $400 on... Miller trailed off, looking at the glowing cracks. 600, actually. The purple is imported from Germany. Hernandez crouched down and touched the surface. It's sticky. Don't touch it, I shrieked. Hernandez recoiled like he'd been burned. I'm sorry, I said, lowering my voice. I'm tense. It's the tack phase. If you touch it, you leave fingerprints. Do you want your fingerprint preserved forever in the driveway, officer? Actually, I paused. That's kind of a cool statement on surveillance state dynamics. Go ahead. Touch it again. I'm good, Hernandez said, wiping his finger on his pants. Miller looked up at the house across the street. The Vance residence. The curtains in the front bay window twitched. I saw the silhouette of a woman holding a phone to her ear. Brenda, the HOA president, the bylaw banshee, the woman who once measured my grass with a ruler and sent me a fine because it was 1/8 of an inch over the community standard. She's watching, isn't she? I asked. Mr. Miller, the officer said, sighing. Look, you're not technically breaking any laws that I can see right now. It's your property. You're not making excessive noise. The torch is very quiet, I pointed out. But, he continued, you are disturbing the peace in a general sense. The visuals alone are startling. Startlingly beautiful, I corrected. And the fire scares people. It's a tool. Plumbers use torches. Chefs use torches for crème brûlée. Would you arrest me for making a midnight crème brûlée, officer? If the crème brûlée was 30 feet long and glowing in the dark, maybe, Miller deadpanned. He was good. I liked him. Here's the deal, Miller said, closing his notebook. You turn off the torch. You go inside. You let this, whatever this is, dry. And you deal with the neighbors in the morning when the sun is up, and people aren't thinking they're being invaded by aliens. I can't just stop, I pleaded. I have to apply the glitter top coat. If I wait, the chemical bond won't adhere. It'll peel in 6 months. Do you want me to have a peeling driveway? That would be an eyesore. Brenda would hate that. Miller looked at the bag of glitter in my hand. Then he looked at the driveway. Then he looked at the curtains across the street. He seemed to be doing a complex calculus involving paperwork, his pension, and how much he really cared about homeowners association disputes. "How long will the glitter take?" Miller asked. 5 minutes, I lied. 10 max, it's a broadcast application. I just toss and pray. Miller sighed deeply. 10 minutes. If we get another call, I'm writing you a ticket for disorderly conduct. You're a patron of the arts, Miller. I knew it. 10 minutes, he repeated, walking back to the cruiser. Hernandez lingered for a second. He looked down at the glowing purple vein near his foot. "Hey," he whispered. "Yeah? Where'd you get the glow powder? My kid would love this for his skateboard ramp." "Amazon," I whispered back. "Look for strontium aluminate. Don't buy the cheap zinc stuff. It fades in an hour. This stuff glows for 12. Hernandez nodded solemnly, a secret pact formed between men who appreciate luminescence, then jogged back to the car. They didn't leave, though. They sat in the cruiser, lights off now, just idling at the curb. They were watching. Waiting. Ensuring I didn't summon a demon or burn down the subdivision. I turned back to my canvas. The epoxy was settling. The glow was steady. It was time for the coup de grace. I unzipped the bag of glitter. Now, you have to understand, this wasn't craft store glitter. This wasn't the stuff you put on a kindergarten Valentine's card that falls off when you sneeze. This was epoxy-safe, solvent-resistant, hexagonal-cut holographic flake. It didn't just reflect light, it shattered it. It took a single beam of photons and beat it into a submission of rainbows. I stepped carefully onto the dry patches of concrete, straddling the wet neon veins like a spelunker navigating a lava flow. I reached into the bag. The glitter felt cool and silky, like metallic sand. I looked across the street. The curtain moved again. I knew she was there. I knew she was seething. She was probably already drafting a cease and desist letter on her iPad. She had started this. She had sent the letter. She had quoted Article 4, Section C regarding driveway maintenance and aesthetics. She had demanded I fill the cracks. "Fill them," she had said. "Return the driveway to a uniform, visually pleasing state." Well, Brenda, I thought, winding up my arm, uniformity is dead. I tossed the glitter. I didn't just sprinkle it. I cast it like a farmer sowing seeds in the spring. I threw it high into the air, letting the wind catch it. For a moment, suspended in the amber glow of the streetlights, it looked like a cloud of diamond dust. Then, gravity took hold. The glitter drifted down, settling into the wet, sticky resin. As it hit the glowing purple and lime green epoxy, something magical happened. The light from below caught the holographic facets of the glitter from above. The cracks didn't just glow anymore. They sparkled. They shimmered with a depth that looked infinite. It looked like I had opened a portal to a dimension where disco never died. I worked quickly, moving up the driveway, broadcasting handful after handful of the stuff. My arms were coated in it. My face was coated in it. I breathed in a flake and coughed, expelling a small cloud of sparkle like a fabulous dragon. By the time I reached the garage door, the bag was empty. I stood there, chest heaving, looking back at my work. It was hideous. It was beautiful. It was the most aggressive act of malicious compliance in the history of homeownership. The police cruiser flicked its headlights on for a brief second, a silent salute, and then rolled away down the street, disappearing into the dark curves of the neighborhood. I was alone with my masterpiece. I walked to the edge of the driveway, avoiding the wet lines, and looked at the mailbox. Inside, I knew, was the original letter, the catalyst, the declaration of war. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, much like this one, though significantly less sparkly. I remembered the weight of the envelope, certified mail, the heavy, cream-colored stationery that Brenda favored because she thought it made her look like the Queen of England rather than the Queen of the cul-de-sac. I remembered reading it while standing over my grill, flipping a burger, feeling the blood pressure rise in my ears. "Dear Mr. Miller," it had begun, "it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee." I wiped a fleck of glitter off my eyelid. "You wanted the cracks filled, Brenda," I whispered to the silent house across the street. "You wanted them sealed. You wanted them to stop being an eyesore." I looked down at the glowing, sparkling, psychedelic spiderweb that was now permanent, industrial-grade, and visible from space. "Be careful what you wish for." The air was cooling, the dew was coming, but it didn't matter. The resin was setting. The glitter was locked in. The war had officially begun. 2 weeks earlier. The problem with Oak Creek Estates wasn't the houses. The houses were fine. They were contemporary colonials, which is real estate speak for we built a box and glued some shutters to it. They were sturdy enough, spacious enough, and they all had 2-car garages that were theoretically for cars, but were actually for storing boxes of things you hadn't unpacked since 2008. No, the problem wasn't the architecture. The problem was the boredom. When people have too much time and too much equity, they start to hallucinate power. They start to believe that the length of their neighbor's grass has a direct correlation to their own moral standing. They form committees. They write bylaws. They patrol the streets in golf carts, looking for unauthorized garden gnomes. I was not a power player. I was a guy who wrote technical manuals for industrial dishwashers. I liked clear instructions. I liked logic. I liked grilling ribeyes on a Friday night and watching the Blue Jays game. I was a simple man, but I was also a petty man. It was a sunny Saturday. I was in the front yard, edging the lawn. Edging is one of those tasks that feels pointless until you do it, and then you stand back and look at that crisp line between the grass and the concrete, and you feel like you've brought order to a chaotic universe. I had just turned off the weed whacker when I felt a disturbance in the force. The birds stopped singing. The wind died down. A chill ran up my spine despite the 80-degree heat. I turned around. Brenda Vance was standing at the end of my driveway. She was wearing her uniform. A floral blouse that cost more than my car, white capri pants that defied the laws of physics by never getting dirty, and a sun visor that was roughly the size of a satellite dish. In her hand, she held a clipboard. "Good morning, Miles," she said. She didn't smile. Brenda didn't smile. She just bared her teeth in a way that suggested she was calculating the scrap value of your soul. "Brenda," I nodded, wiping sweat from my forehead. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Is my trash can visible from the street again? Because I measured the angle, and unless you're standing in the rhododendrons, you can't see it." "Your trash can is adequate," she said, waving a hand dismissively, though the lid was slightly ajar last Thursday. "We'll let that slide for now." "Generous of you." "I'm here about the driveway." I looked down. It was a driveway. It was made of concrete. It held my car up. It performed its function admirably. "What about it?" Brenda sighed, a long, suffering sound that implied she was carrying the weight of the entire subdivision's property values on her shoulders. She walked up the driveway, my driveway, and pointed a manicured finger at the ground. "Look at this," she said. I looked. There was a crack. It started near the garage door and zigzagged its way down toward the street, branching off a few times like a lazy river. "It's a crack, Brenda. Concrete cracks. There are two types of concrete in this world: concrete that is cracked and concrete that is going to crack. It's geology." "It's unsightly," she snapped. "It suggests neglect. It suggests decay. We have standards in Oak Creek, Miles. We aim for a pristine aesthetic. This—" She gestured at the fissure like it was a portal to hell. "This looks like the slums." "The slums?" I laughed. "Brenda, it's a hairline fracture. You can't even fit a dime in there." "I can fit a quarter," she challenged. "I doubt that." She reached into her pocket, produced a quarter, and dropped it. It rolled into the crack and settled. It fit perfectly. "Well," I said, "that's actually pretty satisfying." "It's a hazard," she said. "Someone could trip. A child, an elderly person, a lawyer." "Is a lawyer going to be walking up my driveway?" "It's a violation of Article 4, Section C," she recited. She didn't need to look at the clipboard. She had the bylaws tattooed on her brain. "Homeowners must maintain all paved surfaces in a condition of good repair, free of structural defects, weeds, and unsightly fissures." Define unsightly. "I am looking at it," she said, "and I am citing it." She scribbled something on her clipboard, ripped off a pink carbon copy sheet, and extended it to me. "You have 14 days to remediate the issue," she said. "Failure to comply will result in a daily fine of $50, escalating to $100 after 30 days, and a lien on your property after 60. I took the paper. It was warm from the sun. "Remediate," I read. "So you want me to replace the driveway?" "Repair or replace," she said, turning to leave. "Just fill the cracks, Miles. Seal them. Make it look like you care about this community." She began walking away, her white capris swishing. She stopped at the sidewalk and looked back. "And Miles? Yeah? Try to match the color. Gray. Concrete gray. We don't want a patchwork quilt." She walked off toward her house, probably to measure someone's mailbox height. I stood there, holding the pink slip. I looked at the crack. It was ugly, I had to admit. It was jagged and dark and filled with moss. It did look a bit like a scar. "Make it look like you care," she had said. I looked at the quarter still wedged in the crack. I went inside and grabbed a beer. I sat down at my computer and opened the HOA bylaws. I read Article 4, Section C. I read it 3 times. Surfaces must be sealed, level, and free of debris. Repairs must restore the structural integrity of the surface. I searched for the word color. I searched for gray. I searched for matching. Nothing. The bylaws specified the condition of the repair. They specified the timeline. But they said absolutely nothing about the materials used, provided they were industry-standard masonry or epoxy fillers. I took a sip of beer. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Industry-standard epoxy. I opened a new tab on my browser. I typed in industrial epoxy resin bulk. Then I typed in mica pigment powder. The search results filled the screen. Colors exploded. Neon blues, radioactive greens, hot pinks, golds, silvers. "Try to match the color," she had said. "No, Brenda," I said to the empty room, clicking Add to Cart on a 5-gallon bucket of electric violence purple. "I don't think I will." I wasn't just going to fill the cracks. I was going to celebrate them. I was going to turn my driveway into a monument to malicious compliance, I was going to give Brenda Vance exactly what she asked for, and exactly what she deserved. I hit checkout. The war was on. The official letter arrived 3 days after the pink slip incident. It didn't come in a regular envelope. It came in a thick, rigid cardboard mailer, the kind usually reserved for diplomas or divorce papers. It was delivered by a mail carrier who looked sympathetically at me like he was handing over a draft notice for a war being fought entirely in a swamp. I took the package into my kitchen, cleared a space on the counter between the toaster and the blender, and opened it with a steak knife. Inside was a bound document with a clear plastic cover. Notice of violation and remediation requirement. Parcel 04492B, the Miller residence. It was 12 pages long. 12 pages to say, fix your driveway. I poured a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, the beverage of men about to engage in legal combat, and sat down to read. Most people don't read HOA bylaws. Most people sign them at closing, thinking, sure, I won't raise chickens in the front yard, and I won't paint the garage door neon orange. Sounds reasonable. But that's how they get you. They bank on your apathy. They rely on the fact that you have a job and a life and a desire to not spend your evenings decoding legalese. But I am a technical writer. My entire career is built on reading boring documents and finding the logical fallacies within them. I once spent 3 weeks arguing with an engineer about the difference between depress and press in a manual for an industrial sanitizer. I cracked my knuckles and began to read. Page 1 was boilerplate. Whereas the community values high standards, whereas property values must be protected, page 3 was the meat of the accusation. They had included photos. Grainy black and white photos of my driveway taken from multiple angles. There was even a close-up of the moss in the crack, circled in red marker. It looked like a crime scene photo from a very boring episode of CSI, Suburbia. Then came the demands. The homeowner must engage a licensed contractor to seal, fill, and level all fissures exceeding 1/1/8 of an inch in width. The repair must return the surface to a monolithic, uniform state. The repair must be completed within 14 days of receipt of this notice. And then the kicker, a stapled business card at the back of the packet. Tony's Concrete and Paving Solutions. Proud partner of Oak Creek Estates. I stared at the card. It was thick, matte cardstock with raised lettering. It smelled like corruption. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. 2 houses down, Mr. Henderson was washing his Lexus. Mr. Henderson was a nice guy, but he was terrified of Brenda. He had once apologized to her because his hydrangeas bloomed too early. I walked outside, pretending to check the mail again. Mr. Henderson saw me and waved nervously. I walked over. "Hey, Bill," I said. "Hey, Miles," he said, scrubbing a spot on his hood that didn't exist. "I saw the mailman. Big envelope?" "The biggest," I said. "Driveway cracks." Bill winced. "Oof, yeah, the cracks. They got me last year." "Did they?" "Oh yeah, sent me the same packet. Scary stuff. They threatened to put a lien on the house." "And what did you do?" "I called Tony," Bill said, nodding toward the business card in my pocket like it was a holy relic. "Tony's the guy. He came out, charged me $3,000, poured some slurry over it. It's fine now. A little mismatched, but Brenda signed off on it." $3,000, I choked. "Bill, a bag of concrete patch costs $12. "Yeah, but Tony is, approved," Bill whispered the word like it was a Masonic secret. "If you do it yourself, she'll find something wrong with it. She'll measure the aggregate. She'll check the cure. It's better to just pay the protection money, Miles. I looked at Bill's driveway. It was gray. It was boring. And sure enough, there was a patch of slightly lighter gray running down the middle like a scar. It looked terrible. It looked like the driveway was wearing a toupee. $3,000, I repeated. It includes the compliance fee, Bill added helpfully. I walked back to my house with a fire in my belly that had nothing to do with the coffee. $3,000. A compliance fee. A preferred vendor. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was a shakedown. This was a suburban cartel operation run by a woman in floral capris. I went back to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I didn't go to Tony's website. I went to the county clerk's website. I downloaded the Master Declaration of Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions, CC&Rs, for Oak Creek Estates. It was a 150-page PDF. I hit CTRL-PF. I searched for color. Results. 42. Most of them referred to house paint, earth tones only, roof shingles, slate or black, and mailboxes, black or bronze. I searched for driveway. Results. 12. I zoomed in. Article 4, Section C, Paragraph 2, Driveways and Walkways. All driveways must be constructed of poured concrete. Asphalt is prohibited. Gravel is prohibited. Pavers must be approved by the committee. Okay, standard stuff. Paragraph 3, Maintenance. Driveways must be kept free of structural defects. Cracks exceeding 1/8 inch must be filled with an industry-standard masonry or epoxy compound to prevent water intrusion and further deterioration. I reread it. Industry-standard masonry or epoxy compound. I searched for gray. Results, 0 in this section. I searched for match. Materials used for repairs must be of a quality and durability consistent with the original construction. Quality and durability. Not color, not aesthetics. I sat back in my chair. The bylaws were written by a developer 20 years ago who just wanted to make sure people didn't patch their driveways with chewing gum or mud. They hadn't anticipated me. They hadn't anticipated that industry-standard epoxy comes in every color of the visible spectrum. I had them. I had them on a technicality so wide you could drive a truck through it. But a technicality wasn't enough. I needed a weapon. I opened YouTube. I needed to know how to use epoxy. I had ordered the purple stuff in a fit of rage, but now I needed to know how to actually apply it so it wouldn't fail. If the repair failed, they could nail me on durability. It had to be bulletproof. I fell down the rabbit hole. It started with how to fix a driveway crack. Boring. Guys in dirty t-shirts troweling gray goop. Then the algorithm, sensing my need for something more chaotic, suggested pouring a $10,000 epoxy river table. I clicked it. A man with a beard was pouring gallons of translucent blue liquid into a slab of walnut. He swirled it. He added metallic powder. He used a blowtorch to pop the bubbles. When it dried, it looked like a frozen stream of magical water. It's self-leveling, the man in the video said soothingly. It fills every void. It bonds to the wood at a molecular level. It is stronger than the wood itself. Stronger than the wood itself. I clicked the next video. Kintsugi floor repair. Gold resin. A woman was fixing a cracked tile floor with gold-tinted resin. It was stunning. The cracks weren't hidden. They were highlighted. They became the focal point. The flaw is the feature, she said. I looked at the grainy photo of my driveway in the HOA packet. I looked at the approved patch job on Bill's driveway. If I used gray patch, it would look like a scar. It would look like I tried to hide it and failed. It would look cheap. But if I used color, if I used bold, unapologetic color, it wasn't a repair anymore. It was an installation. I went back to the online store where I had bought the purple pigment. I looked at my order history. Order No. 44402, 1 gallon epoxy, 1 jar electric violence purple pigment. It wasn't enough. The driveway had cracks everywhere. If I just did one purple line, it would look like I spilled something. It needed to be intentional. It needed to be a system. I clicked on Pigments Neon Holographic. I added Chernobyl Lime to the cart. I added Radioactive Barbie Pink. I added Cyberpunk Cyan. I added Molten Gold Leaf. And then I saw it. The pièce de résistance. Holographic hex-cut glitter. The Galaxy series. I imagined Brenda looking at my driveway. I imagined the sun hitting the glitter. I imagined the light reflecting into her perfectly beige living room, dancing on her walls, driving her slowly insane. I added 5 pounds of glitter to the cart. I went to the hardware store website. I needed volume. The little kits wouldn't cut it. I needed gallons of the base resin. I needed squeegees. I needed mixing buckets. I needed a blowtorch. I paused at the blowtorch. Was that overkill? Must be of a quality and durability. Bubbles weaken the epoxy. The torch removes bubbles. The torch is essential for quality. The torch is mandatory. I added the Bernzomatic TS8000 to the cart. My phone buzzed. A text from my wife, Sarah, who was away on a business trip in Chicago. Sarah. How's the weekend going? Anything exciting? I looked at my shopping cart. Subtotal, $642. $10. I looked at the HOA letter demanding I pay Tony $3,000. Me. Just doing some home maintenance, taking care of those cracks Brenda complained about. Sarah. Good. Don't fight her, Miles. Just get it done. Me. Oh, I'm getting it done. I'm going to follow the bylaws to the letter. I hit place order. I felt a rush of dopamine that I assume is usually reserved for supervillains pressing the button that launches the laser. I spent the next 3 days in a state of manic preparation. I cleaned the cracks. I power washed the driveway until the concrete was raw and thirsty. I bought a specialized wire wheel for my angle grinder to open up the fissures, making them wider, deeper, more receptive. Mr. Henderson walked by while I was grinding the concrete. He was wearing a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts. "Prepping for Tony?" he yelled over the sound of the grinder. I cut the power. The grinder whined down to silence. "No, Bill," I said, wiping concrete dust from my safety goggles. "I'm doing this one in-house." Bill looked worried. "Be careful, Miles. If it's not up to code, they'll make you rip it out. And ripping out concrete costs way more than $3 grand. "It'll be up to code," I assured him. "It'll be smoother than glass. It'll be harder than steel." What product are you using?" I patted the stack of boxes that had just arrived on my porch. They were labeled Danger, Corrosive and Industrial Use Only. "A custom polymer blend," I said. Bill nodded, unconvinced. "Well, good luck. Brenda's watching." "I know," I said, looking at her house. The blinds were open. She was there. I went inside and started unboxing. The cans of resin were heavy. The jars of pigment were vibrant, glowing even in the dim light of my garage. I set up my mixing station. I laid out the cups. I put on my respirator mask. I looked like I was about to cook crystal meth, but I was doing something far more addictive. I was about to prove a point. Tomorrow was Saturday. The weather forecast was clear. High of 75. Low humidity. Perfect curing weather. I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there visualizing the pour, the viscosity, the flow, the reaction. I was Miles Miller. I was a taxpayer. I was a homeowner. And tomorrow, I was going to turn my driveway into a disco floor. Let's see you measure this with a ruler, Brenda. If you have never been to a Build-All Depot or a Lois Mart on a Saturday morning, you have never seen the true face of American desperation. It is a place where optimism goes to die, usually in the plumbing aisle. It is a place filled with men staring blankly at wall anchors, wondering if a 3/8-inch toggle bolt is enough to hold up a shelf, or if it will be the thing that finally brings their marriage crashing down. I arrived at 8:00 a.m. I was driving my wife's Toyota Camry because my own car, a sensible hatchback, was currently full of recycling I had neglected to take out for 3 weeks. The Camry was pristine. It had beige leather seats. It smelled like vanilla and responsibility. I was about to ruin it. I grabbed a flatbed cart, the one with the wobbly wheel that screams like a dying pterodactyl, and marched into the automatic doors. I had a list. It was a list born of madness and internet forums. 40 gallons of clear coat garage. Floor epoxy. I had decided the online order wouldn't be enough volume for the deep pour I was planning. 12 mixing buckets, 5-gallon. 5 paint mixers, drill attachment. 10 gallons of acetone for cleanup, mistakes. 4 industrial squeegees. 1 box of nitrile gloves, black because I wanted to look cool while destroying my property value. Knee pads. I navigated the aisles with the focus of a Navy SEAL infiltrating a compound. I bypassed the garden center, ignoring the siren call of the begonias. I ignored the tool corral, though I did pause briefly to admire a chop saw. I reached the paint and sealant aisle. It was a canyon of chemicals. I started loading the cart. The epoxy came in 2-part kits. Part A, resin, and Part B, hardener. I needed 20 kits. I cleared the shelf. I stacked the boxes 3 high. The cart groaned. The sheer weight of the chemicals made the wheels splay out slightly. Planning a murder? I turned around. Standing there was an employee. His orange apron was stained with colors that no longer existed in nature. His name tag said Earl. He looked to be about 75 years old, with skin the texture of a dried tobacco leaf and eyes that had seen too many homeowners try to install their own ceiling fans. "Excuse me?" I said. 40 gallons of epoxy, Earl said, gesturing at my cart with a paint stir stick. And 10 gallons of acetone. That's usually the shopping list for someone trying to dissolve a body or seal a basement that's already flooding. Which one is it? Neither, Earl, I said, hoisting the last box onto the stack. I'm sealing a driveway. Earl squinted at me. He looked at the boxes. That's garage floor epoxy, interior use. It says UV resistant on the box, I countered. It says UV resistant, Earl corrected, tapping the cardboard with a gnarled finger. Not UV proof. You put that outside in the direct sun, it's gonna yellow. In 2 years, your driveway is gonna look like a smoker's teeth. I'm adding pigment, I said. Heavy saturation. Mica powder. It'll block the UV rays. Earl paused. He chewed on the inside of his cheek. He was processing this. In his 30 years at the depot, He had probably seen people paint their lawns green and try to glue their siding back on. But this was new. "Pigment," he said flatly. "What color? Gray? Slate? Sad suburban beige?" "No, Earl. Electric violence purple. And Chernobyl lime. And I have 5 pounds of holographic glitter." Earl stared at me for a long time. The ambient hum of the store, the beeping of forklifts, the scream of a saw cutting lumber seemed to fade away. It was just 2 men standing over a cart of chemicals. "You having a breakdown, son?" Earl asked. It wasn't an insult. It was a genuine inquiry. "I'm having a dispute with my HOA," I said. Earl's face changed. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a deep, weary understanding. A twinkle appeared in his cloudy eyes. He hated the store. He hated the customers. But he hated authority more. "HOA," he muttered. "Those bastards told me I couldn't have a flagpole. Said it was a vertical intrusion." "They told me my cracks were unsightly," I said. "So I'm highlighting them." Earl looked at the cart again. He looked at the squeegees. He looked at the acetone. "You're gonna need more mixing buckets," he said. "Epoxy kicks fast. Once you mix A and B, you got 20 minutes. If you reuse a bucket that has curing residue in it, the heat from the old batch will flash cure the new batch. You'll end up with a bucket of smoking plastic rock." "I have 12 buckets," I said. "Get 20, Earl commanded. "And get the graduated ones so you don't screw up the ratio. And don't use the wooden stir sticks. They introduce moisture. Moisture causes clouding. You want the plastic paddles." He walked over to a shelf and grabbed a handful of plastic mixing paddles, tossing them into my cart. "And grab a heat gun," he added, "for the edges. The torch is good for the middle, but you'll scorch the grass if you get too close to the edge. Use a heat gun for the perimeter." "Thanks, Earl," I said, feeling a sudden surge of affection for this grumbling sage of solvents. "Don't thank me," he grunted, turning back to his paint mixing machine. "Just take pictures. I want to see the look on their faces when the sun hits that glitter." I saluted him and pushed my cart toward the checkout. The checkout experience was less spiritual. The cashier, a teenager named Braden, who was texting with one hand while scanning with the other, didn't even blink at the quantity. "Did you find everything you were looking for?" he droned. "Yes. And some things I wasn't," I said philosophically. "That'll be $842.16. I swiped my card. The machine beeped. The receipt printed. It was 4 feet long. I draped it around my neck like a scarf of commerce. "Have a nice day," Braden said, not looking up. "I'm going to try, Braden. I'm going to try." I pushed the cart out into the parking lot. The automatic doors parted, and the heat of the day hit me. It was already 80 degrees. The sun was beating down. I navigated the cart over the rumble strips, the boxes of epoxy rattling ominously. I reached the Camry. I popped the trunk. I looked at the trunk. I looked at the cart. Physics is a cruel mistress. The boxes were square. The trunk was organic. It had wheel wells. It had hinges. It had a random hump in the middle where the spare tire lived. I started playing Tetris. I managed to fit 6 boxes in the trunk. I fit 4 more in the back seat. I fit 2 in the front passenger seat, strapping them in with the seatbelt like twin toddlers. I still had 8 boxes of epoxy, 20 buckets, the acetone, and the squeegees. "Think, Miles," I whispered. "You are an engineer of words. You can engineer a packing solution." I decided to unbox the remaining kits. If I took the cans out of the cardboard, I could shove them into the footwells and the gaps under the seats. I started ripping open boxes. I was sweating now. I took off my "I'm not arguing" t-shirt, revealing a white undershirt, and used the t-shirt to wipe my face. I was throwing cardboard into the cart, stacking cans of resin in the rear footwell. It was going well. I was winning. And then disaster struck. I had brought a sample bag of the pigment with me. I wanted to match it against some spray paint for the mailbox, a secondary project I was considering, and it was a 1-pound bag of electric blue mica powder. Mica powder is not like sand. Sand is heavy. Sand stays where you put it. Mica powder is composed of microscopic platelets that are lighter than air and have the static charge of a lightning bolt. It is essentially colored smoke that you can buy by the pound. The bag was sitting on the roof of the car while I loaded the buckets. I reached for a gallon of acetone. My elbow bumped the bag. It slid down the windshield. I lunged for it. I caught it. Victory! But in my triumph, I squeezed. The bag had a Ziploc seal. The seal was not closed. Poof! It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a sudden, silent expansion of blue matter. The bag exploded in my hands. A cloud of electric blue dust erupted into the air, shimmering in the sunlight. It was beautiful, in the way a nuclear mushroom cloud is beautiful. The wind shifted. The blue cloud enveloped me. It went into my nose. It went into my mouth. It coated my sweaty arms, my white undershirt, my hair. It drifted into the open window of the Camry and settled lovingly onto the beige leather seats. I stood there, frozen, eyes squeezed shut, holding the empty plastic bag. I opened my eyes. I was blue. Not just a little blue. I looked like I had been murdered by a Smurf. I looked like a member of the Blue Man Group who had let himself go. I looked at the car. The interior was now electric blue, beige two-tone. Sarah was going to kill me. She wasn't just going to kill me. She was going to epoxy me into the driveway. Well, I said aloud. My voice sounded gritty. I spit out a wad of blue saliva. Miles? The voice came from behind me. It was a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of broken glass. I turned slowly. Mrs. Higgins. She was parked in the spot right next to me. I hadn't even heard her pull up. She was sitting in her silver Mercedes, the window rolled down. Mrs. Higgins was Brenda's lieutenant. She was the vice president of the garden committee. She was the woman who reported people for leaving their Christmas lights up past January 5th. She stared at me. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked at my blue face. She looked at the blue car. She looked at the mountain of industrial chemicals in my back seat. "Oh, my heavens," she gasped. "Miles, are you okay?" I had a choice. I could tell the truth. I am a clumsy man engaged in a petty war with your best friend, and I have just detonated a pigment bomb. Or I could lie. I straightened up. I brushed a cloud of blue dust off my shoulder. It hung in the air between us. "Hello, Mrs. Higgins," I said. I tried to sound casual. "I'm fantastic." "You're blue," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "It's a treatment." "A treatment." "For the skin," I improvised wildly. "Blue algae, very high in antioxidants. It draws out the toxins. My dermatologist recommended it. I'm feeling very detoxified." She looked at the car. "And the car?" "The car also has toxins," I said. "It's a holistic approach." Her eyes darted to the boxes of epoxy in the front seat. "And all those chemicals? Epoxy Coat 5000? "Oh, that," I waved a hand. "Just some light landscaping. I'm regrouting the patio. You know how it is." "Miles," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Brenda said you were planning something. She said you had a look in your eye. Brenda has an active imagination, I said, wiping a streak of blue powder from my forehead, which only smeared it into a Braveheart-style war paint. I'm just a guy fixing his driveway, Mrs. Higgins, following the rules, filling the cracks. She stared at me for another long moment. She didn't buy it. I knew she didn't buy it. She was going to text Brenda before she even put the car in park. "Well," she said, rolling up her window, "you take care, Miles. Don't suffocate." "I'll try not to," I called out cheerfully. She drove away, parking 6 spots down, presumably to avoid the blast radius of whatever insanity I was projecting. I looked at my reflection in the side mirror of the Camry. I looked like a deranged aquatic deity. My eyes were white circles in a mask of shimmering blue. My teeth were blue. I looked at the remaining buckets. "Get in the car, Miles," I told myself. "Just get in the car." I shoved the last of the buckets into the trunk, slamming it shut on the 3rd try. I climbed into the driver's seat. A puff of blue dust rose from the leather as I sat down. I turned the key. The engine started. The AC blasted, blowing more loose powder into my face. I pulled out of the parking lot. I drove home with the windows down, hoping the wind would blow some of the evidence off me. It didn't. It just made the glitter embedded in the powder sparkle more aggressively. At a stoplight, a child in the car next to me pointed and screamed, "Look, Mom! It's Sonic the Hedgehog!" The mother looked. She locked her doors. I stared straight ahead. I had the resin. I had the buckets. I had the pigment, most of it. And now, thanks to the explosion, I had the mindset. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a warrior, and I was already wearing my war paint. I pulled into my subdivision. I drove past the sign that said Oak Creek Estates, a tradition of excellence. I turned onto my street. I saw Brenda's house. I saw her car in the driveway. I pulled into my own driveway, the cracked, broken battlefield that would soon be transformed. I got out of the car. I stood there, blue and shimmering in the noon sun, and began to unload the chemicals. Brenda came out to check her mail. She stopped. She looked at me. She looked at the blue Camry. She looked at the stack of danger, flammable boxes I was building on the porch. I didn't say a word. I just waved. A slow, deliberate, blue-handed wave. She turned around and walked back inside without checking the mail. I smiled. The psychological warfare had begun, and I hadn't even opened a can yet. Now I just had to figure out how to explain the car to Sarah. Maybe I can tell her the car wanted to feel beautiful, too. I picked up a squeegee and marched into the garage. It was time to mix. Saturday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The sun was blazing, the humidity was climbing, and I was standing in my garage looking like a low-budget astronaut. I was wearing a white Tyvek biohazard suit, heavy-duty knee pads, safety goggles, and a dual-cartridge respirator. My skin was still faintly stained blue from the pigment explosion of the previous day, giving me the appearance of a Smurf who had cooked a little too much crystal meth. "This is it," I said to the empty garage. My voice sounded like Darth Vader inside the mask. "Operation Rainbow Vein is a go." I hit the button on the garage door opener. The door rumbled up, revealing the stage. My driveway was prepped. I had spent the night taping off the edges with painter's tape. I had blown out every speck of dust with a leaf blower at 3:00 a.m., a separate noise complaint, but we'll get to that later. The cracks were open, hungry, and waiting. The neighborhood was already watching. Across the street, Brenda was gardening, and by gardening, I mean she was standing perfectly still among her rose bushes, holding a pair of shears she wasn't using, staring at me through oversized sunglasses. To my left, Mr. Henderson was washing his car again. He stopped when he saw the Tyvek suit. He gave me a slow, fearful nod. To my right, the cool dads, Rick and Dave, were setting up lawn chairs on Dave's porch. Rick cracked a beer. It was 9:15 a.m. I respected that. I walked out to the mixing station I had set up on the lawn, a folding table covered in a tarp, holding 20 gallons of resin and the jars of neon powder. "Morning, Miles," Rick shouted. "Cooking up something illegal?" I pulled down my mask. "Art, Rick, I'm cooking up art." I snapped the mask back up and got to work. Epoxy is a cruel mistress. You mix part A and part B, and you start a chemical timer. It's an exothermic reaction. It gets hot. If you leave it in the bucket too long, it will boil, smoke, and turn into a rock hard enough to murder someone with. I had about 20 minutes of pot life per batch. I poured the first gallon. Glug, glug, glug. I added the hardener. I reached for the pigment. Chernobyl lime. I dumped a generous scoop into the bucket. I attached the mixing paddle to my drill and pulled the trigger. The clear sludge turned a violent, radioactive green. It was the color of toxic waste in a cartoon. It was magnificent. I ran to the driveway, bucket in hand. I didn't have fancy injection tools. I had repurposed ketchup squeeze bottles and a plastic Solo cup. I knelt down at the top of the driveway, near the garage door, and poured the green slime into the main artery of the crack. It flowed like honey. It filled the void, self-leveling instantly, grabbed the blowtorch and swept it quickly over the surface. Hiss! The bubbles popped. The resin turned glass clear and vibrant. "One down," I muttered. 400 to go. I worked in a frenzy. I mixed a batch of electric violence purple, then radioactive Barbie pink, then cyberpunk cyan. I was creating a vascular system of neon. The driveway looked like it was bleeding Skittles. Sweat was pouring down my back inside the plastic suit. My goggles were fogging up. I was crawling on my hands and knees, alternating between squeezing bottles of goo and torching them. "He's painting the cracks," I heard Brenda's voice drift across the street. She was on her phone. "No, not gray. Colors, loud colors. It looks like a clown exploded." I ignored her. I was in the zone. Then, the inevitable happened. The epoxy was in the tacky phase, sticky enough to grab anything that touched it, liquid enough to ruin it. A FedEx truck rumbled up the street. The driver, a guy in shorts who looked like he was training for a marathon, hopped out with a package for me. He saw the cones. He saw the tape. He saw the glowing neon veins. "Package for Miller!" he shouted, preparing to sprint up the driveway. "No!" I screamed through my mask, scrambling to my feet like a swamp creature. "The floor is lava! Do not touch the lava!" He froze, one foot hovering over a vein of wet cyan. "Throw it!" I yelled, aiming for the grass. He tossed the box. It landed in the azaleas. "Nice arm!" I yelled. "Weird hobby, man," he yelled back, retreating to his truck. I went back to pouring. I was mixing the final color. Molten gold leaf. This was for the center crack, the Grand Canyon of the driveway. I wanted it to look like the earth was splitting open to reveal a gold mine. I was pouring the gold when I heard the yapping. Brenda had a dog. His name was Winston. Winston was a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, a breed known for being cute, expensive, and having zero survival instincts. Winston had escaped. I saw him trotting down Brenda's driveway. He saw me. He saw the bright colors. To a dog, my driveway probably looked like the world's most interesting chew toy. "Winston, no!" Brenda shrieked from her porch. Winston didn't speak English. Winston spoke chaos. He bolted across the street. "Stop the dog!" I yelled, dropping my blowtorch. Rick and Dave stood up, beers in hand, but they were too slow. Winston hit the driveway. Splat, splat, splat. He stepped right into a fresh vein of electric violence purple. Then he hopped into Chernobyl lime. "Oh, God," I whispered. Winston realized his mistake immediately. The epoxy was thick and sticky. He lifted a paw, and a string of neon purple goo stretched out like mozzarella cheese on a pizza. He panicked. He spun in circles. Splat. Squish. Squelch. He was now painting his own abstract art across the dry patches of concrete. Brenda reached the edge of the driveway. She was hyperventilating. "My baby!" she screamed. "You've glued my baby!" "Don't come on the concrete, Brenda," I warned, holding up a squeegee like a weapon. "You'll make it worse." "Get him off. Get him off." I lunged for the dog. I grabbed Winston by his harness. He was surprisingly heavy. I lifted him into the air. His 4 paws were dripping with neon slime. He looked at me and licked my respirator. "I have him," I announced, carrying him like a contaminated football toward the grass. I set him down on Brenda's lawn. Winston shook himself. Purple droplets flew everywhere, landing on Brenda's pristine white capris. Brenda looked at her pants. She looked at her dog, whose paws now looked like he had been stomping grapes in a radioactive vineyard. She looked at me. "You," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a rage that could crack tectonic plates. "You have ruined my dog." "He's not ruined," I said, peeling off my sticky gloves. "He's customized, and technically, Brenda, he failed to observe the posted safety signage." "This is assault," she said. "I am calling the police. I am calling the EPA. I am calling your mother." "You call whoever you want," I said, adrenaline crashing through my system. "But you owe me for 3 ounces of purple resin. That stuff is imported." She grabbed Winston and marched toward her house, leaving a trail of purple paw prints on her own walkway. I turned back to my driveway. The paw prints in the wet resin on my side were interesting. They added texture. They added narrative. "Keep it," Rick shouted from across the street. "It adds character." I looked at the mess. I grabbed the gold resin. I carefully filled in Winston's paw prints with gold, immortalizing his trespass. "Kintsugi," I whispered. I spent the next 6 hours finishing the pour. I laid down the glitter topcoat as the sun went down. The police came, Section 1, but they left. By 3:00 a.m. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and smelled like chemicals. But I stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. It wasn't just a repair. It was a galaxy frozen in stone. I went to bed, praying it would cure before Tony showed up. The sun rose at 6:30 a.m. I know this because the light hit my driveway, bounced off the holographic glitter, refracted through the bedroom window, and burned a laser hole through my retinas. I stumbled out of bed and went to the window. It was blinding. The driveway looked like a unicorn had thrown up a disco ball. The colors were vibrant, deep, and glossy. The gold veins shimmered. The purple pulsed. The lime green looked like it could power a small city. And parked right in front of it was a white Ford Super Duty van with Tony's Concrete and Paving stenciled on the side in aggressive block lettering. "Oh no," I muttered. I threw on a bathrobe and ran downstairs. I burst out the front door. Brenda was already there. She was standing next to the van, arms crossed, looking smug. Beside her stood a man who can only be described as a geometric shape. He was square. His head was square. His shoulders were square. Even his mustache looked structural. He was holding a sledgehammer. A literal sledgehammer. "Good morning, Miles," Brenda chirped. She sounded happy. This was bad. "I'd like you to meet Tony. He's here to discuss the demolition." Demolition? I tightened my bathrobe sash. "There will be no demolition. The bylaws state I have 14 days to repair. I repaired." "You vandalized," Brenda corrected. "This is not a repair. This is a psychedelic nightmare." "Tony, tell him." Tony shifted his weight. The gravel crunched under his boots. He looked at me. He looked at the driveway. He didn't say anything. He just chewed on a toothpick. "Tony," I said, stepping forward. "Miles Miller, big fan of your work on the Johnson patio. The aggregate exposure was top tier." Tony blinked. "You noticed the aggregate?" "River rock blend, right?" I guessed. "With a satin seal?" Tony nodded slowly. "Matte finish, but yeah." "Look," Brenda interrupted. "Tony is the HOA-approved contractor. He determines if a repair meets the community standards. And this," she waved a hand at the glittering expanse, "clearly does not." "It's not gray," Tony rumbled. His voice sounded like a cement mixer full of gravel. "Exactly," Brenda cried. "It's not gray. It's an eyesore. Tony, tell him how much it will cost to rip this out and pour a proper slab." Tony walked onto the driveway. I held my breath. It had been curing for 12 hours. It should be hard to the touch, but not fully hardened. If he stepped on it and sank, I was dead. He took a step. His heavy work boot landed on a vein of cyberpunk cyan. Nothing happened. He didn't sink. He didn't stick. He tapped his toe. Click, click. "It's hard," Tony said. He sounded surprised. He crouched down. He took a knife out of his pocket and tried to scratch the surface of the resin. The knife skittered off. "Epoxy?" Tony asked, looking up at me. "Two-part industrial polyaspartic blend," I lied. It was standard epoxy, but polyaspartic sounded more expensive. 100% solids, UV stable, Shore D hardness of 85. Tony raised an eyebrow. "Shore D 85? That's harder than the concrete." "I used a localized heat treatment to degauss the mixture," I added, channeling every YouTube video I had watched. "And I added mica powder for structural binding." Tony ran his hand along the gold-filled paw print left by Winston. "And this? The dog track?" "Intentional texture variation," I said, "to increase traction." Tony stood up. He looked at the sledgehammer in his hand. Then he looked at the driveway again. He walked the length of it, inspecting the edges where the resin met the concrete. It was a perfect, seamless bond. "Brenda," Tony said. "Yes, Tony?" She stepped forward, ready for the kill. "When can you start jackhammering?" "I can't," Tony said. Brenda froze. "Excuse me?" "I can't demo this," Tony said, pointing at the neon. "Veins. This stuff, it's bonded to the substrate. If I try to jackhammer this out, the epoxy is going to pull the concrete up with it. It's stronger than the slab. I'd have to rip out the whole driveway, maybe damage the foundation of the garage." "So rip out the whole driveway!" Brenda shrieked. "That's a $10,000 job," Tony said, "and I ain't doing it." "Why not?" Tony looked at the ground. He nudged a particularly sparkly patch of radioactive Barbie pink. "Because," Tony said, and a small, grudging smile appeared under his mustache. "It's kinda tight." "Tight?" Brenda gasped. "It's pink!" "Nah, look at the flow," Tony said, gesturing with his toothpick. "He followed the natural fracture lines. It's structural art, Brenda. The PSI on this patch is probably double what the city pours. This driveway is going to last longer than the house. He turned to me. Where'd you get the glitter? That's hex cut, right? Galaxy series, I said. Solvent resistant. Nice, Tony nodded. Doesn't clump. Brenda was turning a shade of purple that matched the driveway. Tony, I am the president of the association. I am ordering you to declare this non-compliant. Tony shrugged. He pulled a clipboard out of his back pocket. Technically, he said, scribbling on a form, the bylaw says the repair must be sealed, level, and free of debris. Is it sealed? Yes. Is it level? Perfectly. Is there debris? No, just glitter. He ripped the form off the clipboard and handed it to me. Inspection passed. Notes. Custom seal. High durability. Aesthetic. Subjective. Subjective! Brenda snatched the paper from my hand, but I snatched it back. You can't pass this. It glows in the dark. Does it? Tony asked me, eyes widening. Like a rave in Chernobyl, I confirmed. Cool, Tony said. He walked back to his van. Call me if you want to seal the patio, Miles. I like your style. He slammed the door and drove off, leaving a cloud of diesel fumes and a very confused HOA president. I stood there, clutching the inspection form like a golden ticket. Well, Brenda, I said, folding the paper and putting it in my bathrobe pocket. Looks like I'm up to code. Brenda was trembling. She looked at the driveway. She looked at me. She looked at the house across the street where the cool dads were openly applauding from their porch. This isn't over, Miles, she whispered. The venom in her voice was palpable. You think you've won because you confused a contractor with shiny objects? There are fines. There are noise complaints. There is the community aesthetics clause. Tony said it was structural art, I reminded her. Tony is a moron with a sledgehammer, she snapped. I'm going to the board. I'm going to fine you for every color of the rainbow. $500 a day, Miles. Per color. She spun on her heel and marched back to her house. I watched her go. $500 a day. I looked down at the driveway. The sun was climbing higher. The glitter was dancing. It was the most ridiculous, tacky, beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pulled out my phone. I opened the Amazon app. Search, I said to the voice command. Solar-powered LED strips. Waterproof. Outdoor. If she wanted to find me for aesthetics, I was going to give her a light show. And maybe, I mused, looking at the drab gray siding of my house, some exterior paint. The battle for the driveway was won. But the war for the soul of Oak Creek Estates had just begun. I walked back inside, made a fresh pot of coffee, and waited for the police to come back. Because I had a feeling Brenda wasn't done dialing 911. The fine arrived on a Monday. It was taped to my front door. In Oak Creek Estates, taping something to a front door is considered an act of aggression akin to throwing a brick through a window. It implies urgency. It implies that the Postal Service, a federal entity, is too slow for the wrath of the Homeowners Association. I peeled the envelope off the wood. It left a sticky residue. I made a mental note to bill the HOA for solvent and labor. I opened it right there on the porch, wearing my I paused my game to be here t-shirt. Notice of fine assessment violation. Non-conforming aesthetic. Article 9, Section B. Description. The driveway of terror. Brenda had actually written that. Penalty, $500 per day until remediation is complete. Current balance, $500, $100. $500 a day. I did the math. That's $182,500 a year. For that price, I could pave the entire neighborhood in Italian marble. I could hire a full-time bard to stand on Brenda's lawn and sing about her shortcomings. I walked into the kitchen, poured a coffee, and sat down at the table. My wife, Sarah, was back from her trip. She was eating yogurt and looking at the blue-beige interior of her Camry through the window with a mixture of horror and resignation. "You got a letter," she said, not looking up. "I got a ransom note," I corrected. "They want $500 a day." Sarah sighed. It was the sigh of a woman who knew she had married a man who treated petty grievances like a crusade for the Holy Grail. "Miles, just paint it gray. Tony said he could do a topcoat. A gray topcoat. We can end this." "End this?" I slammed the letter down. "Sarah, this isn't about the driveway anymore. This is about freedom. This is about the tyranny of the beige. If I paint it gray, the terrorists win." "The terrorists are a 60-year-old woman named Brenda who grows prize-winning hydrangeas," Sarah pointed out. "Hydrangeas of oppression," I countered. I read the letter again. Non-conforming aesthetic. I went back to the bylaws on my laptop. I searched for lighting. Article 12. Safety and security. Homeowners are encouraged to maintain adequate lighting on driveways and walkways to ensure the safety of pedestrians and delivery personnel. Solar-powered, low-voltage landscape lighting is permitted and encouraged. Permitted and encouraged. I looked at the fine, then I looked at the safety clause. If my driveway was, as Brenda claimed, a hazard, then surely it required enhanced safety measures. It required demarcation. It required a landing strip. I stood up. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked. "To the garage," I said. "I need to ensure the safety of our delivery personnel." The installation took 2 days. I didn't just buy the little solar stakes you stick in the grass that emit the light equivalent of a dying firefly. No. I bought industrial-grade, waterproof, solar-charged LED strip housing. I used my masonry saw to cut a shallow channel along the entire perimeter of the driveway, right where the epoxy met the grass. I laid the track. I wired the panels. I didn't stop there. I bought smart LEDs, the kind you can control with an app, the kind that have 16 million colors, the kind that can pulse to the beat of music. By Wednesday afternoon, the system was live. I waited for nightfall. At 8:30 p.m., the sun dipped below the horizon. The streetlights flickered on, casting their sickly orange glow. I stood on the porch with my phone. Sarah stood behind me, holding a glass of wine like it was a shield. "Ready?" I asked. "No," she said. I tapped the screen. Mode, runway, color, supernova white. Click. The perimeter of my driveway ignited. It wasn't soft accent lighting. It was the kind of light you see when you die and go to heaven, assuming heaven is a discotheque. 2 blindingly bright strips of white light shot down the length of the driveway, outlining the rainbow epoxy in stark, terrifying relief. The glitter in the resin caught the light and exploded. The entire front of my house was illuminated. The front of Brenda's house, across the street, was also illuminated. I could see her doilies clearly through her living room window. "It's bright," Sarah said, shielding her eyes. "It's safe," I corrected. "Nobody is going to trip on this. You could land a Boeing 747 on this driveway." I tapped the screen again. Mode, Aurora Borealis. Speed, slow fade. The lights shifted. They went from blinding white to a slow, undulating wave of blues, greens, and purples that perfectly matched the epoxy veins. The driveway looked like it was breathing. I saw Brenda's front door fly open. She stormed out, wearing a silk robe and holding a phone to her ear. She looked like a vengeful moth drawn to the flame. "Miles!" she screamed. I waved. "Evening, Brenda. Just enhancing the safety features. Article 12. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "It's brighter than the sun. I can't sleep. My birds are confused." "It's solar, Brenda. It's green energy." She retreated inside and slammed the door. 10 minutes later, the blue lights arrived. It was Officer Miller and Officer Hernandez again. At this point, I felt like we should exchange Christmas cards. They pulled up to the curb. They didn't even turn, on their cruiser's flashing lights. There was no need. My driveway was providing enough illumination for a 3-block radius. Officer Miller got out. He looked tired. He looked like a man who was questioning every life choice that had led him to this specific driveway. "Mr. Miller," he said, leaning against the door of his squad car. "Officer Miller," I replied, walking down the glowing runway to meet him. "Back so soon?" "We got a call," Hernandez chirped from the passenger seat. He was wearing sunglasses. At night. "Complaint says you're running a, quote, illegal Las Vegas strip club on your lawn." "It's safety lighting, officer," I said, holding up my phone. "Low voltage, solar-powered, fully compliant with Article 12 of the HOA bylaws regarding pedestrian safety." Miller looked at the driveway. The lights were currently cycling through a slow pink to orange fade. "It's pulsing, Miles," Miller said. "Safety lights don't usually pulse." "That's the alert mode," I improvised. "It heightens awareness." "It's heightening my migraine," Miller said. "Look, is it technically legal?" "Probably. Is it disturbing the peace? Brenda claims light pollution is a form of noise." "Light is not noise, Miller," I said. "Physics, photons versus sound waves. You can't write me a noise complaint for photons." Miller looked at his partner. "Can we write a noise complaint for photons?" "I don't think so, Sarg," Hernandez said, admiring the glow. "But we could get him for creating a distraction to drivers?" "There are no drivers," I pointed out. "It's a cul-de-sac. The only people driving here are people who live here." Miller sighed. He looked across the street at Brenda's house. She was standing in the window, filming us. "Miles," Miller said, dropping the official tone. "She's going to sue you. You know that, right? She's going to drag you to court. She's going to drain your bank account." "Let her try," I said. "I have the high ground, and the high lumens." "Can you at least dim it?" Miller asked. "Just a little, so the ISS doesn't think we're signaling for extraction?" I looked at my phone. I slid the brightness slider from 100% to 75%. The glare softened slightly. "How's that?" "Better," Miller lied. "We're going to mark this as resolved civil matter. But seriously, Miles, maybe pick up a hobby, knitting, stamp collecting, something that doesn't involve industrial chemicals?" "I'll consider it," I said. They drove off. I stood there, victorious. I turned to go inside. Brenda was back on her porch. "I'm fining you!" she screamed across the street. "Another 500. That's 1,000 a day, Miles. I'll take your house." Something snapped. Maybe it was the coffee. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the fact that I had spent 3 days inhaling epoxy fumes. I walked to the edge of my glowing driveway. I stood directly in the center of the cyberpunk cyan vein. I looked Brenda in the eye. "You want to take my house, Brenda?" I yelled. "I will," she shouted back. "I'll foreclose on you." "You hate the driveway," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You hate the colors. You hate the individuality. It is a blight." "Well, Brenda," I said, gesturing to my beige 2-story colonial house behind me, I've been looking at the siding. It's a little drab, don't you think? She froze. What? I have 10 gallons of electric violence purple left over, I lied. I only had 2, but she didn't know that. And I have a paint sprayer, and the bylaws for house paint only specify earth tones. Purple is not an earth tone, she shrieked. Have you ever seen an eggplant, Brenda? I yelled. Eggplants grow in the earth. Flowers grow in the earth. Amethysts come from the earth. Technically, purple is an earth tone. Don't you dare! Push me, Brenda, I roared, throwing my arms up like a conductor. Push me 1 more inch, and I will turn this house into a grape-flavored nightmare. I will paint the shutters lime green. I will put glitter in the gutters. I will make this place look like Willy Wonka's summer home. Brenda stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was picturing it. She was seeing the property values plummet in real time. She turned around, walked inside, and locked the door. I stood there, panting. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from the lighting app. Battery low. I walked inside. Sarah was waiting in the hallway. Did you just threaten to paint our house purple? She asked. Strategic deterrence, I said, locking the door. Mutually assured destruction. It's the only language she understands. I'm going to bed, Sarah said. You're sleeping on the couch. Fair, I said. I slept like a baby. The war had been local. It was about to go global. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was at work, remotely, writing a user manual for a commercial salad spinner when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was a kid, maybe 19. He was holding a pizza box. He was wearing a beanie, despite it being 80 degrees. I hadn't ordered a pizza. I opened the door. Pizza for, he looked at the receipt. Brenda Vance? Wrong house, I said. Brenda is across the street, the house with the soulless white hydrangeas. Oh, my bad, bro, the kid said. He turned to leave. Then he stopped. He looked down. The sun was hitting the driveway at the perfect golden hour angle. The holographic glitter was refracting light into miniature rainbows that danced in the air. The gold veins were glowing. The purple looked like liquid magic. Whoa, the kid said. He dropped the pizza box. It was fine, probably. He pulled out his phone. Bro, he said. Is this real? It's epoxy, I said. Kintsugi style. It's trippy, he whispered. It's like Mario Kart, Rainbow Road. He held up his phone and started filming. He walked down the driveway, panning the camera over the cracks, then spinning around to get a selfie with the house. Yo, TikTok, he said into the phone. I'm delivering a pepperoni to Karenville, and look at this driveway. Look at this drip. This man is living in 3025. Sheesh. He added a sound effect. He added a filter. He hit post. Thanks, man, he said to me. That's fire. He picked up the pizza and walked across the street. I watched him deliver it to Brenda. I saw him point back at my house. I saw Brenda slam the door. I thought nothing of it. I went back to the salad spinner manual. The next morning, I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard since I lived in the city. Traffic. I looked out the window. There were cars, lots of cars. They were double parked along the street. There were teenagers on skateboards. There were people with professional cameras. There was a girl in a cosplay outfit dancing in the middle of my driveway while a friend filmed her with a ring light. What is happening? Sarah asked, joining me at the window. I opened my phone. My nephew had sent me a text. Link, TikTok, the Rainbow Roadhouse. Views, 4.2 million. I clicked it. It was the Pizza Kids video. It had blown up. The comments were insane. User 123. Where is this? Glow Queen. I need to do a transition video here. Anti-HOA warrior. The hero we need. Destroy the suburbs. Concrete Zaddy. That epoxy work is clean, though. We're viral, I said. Is that good? Sarah asked. It's chaotic, I said. Which means it's bad for Brenda. I went outside. As soon as I opened the door, a cheer went up. It's him, someone shouted. The Epoxy King. A girl with blue hair ran up to the porch. Can I take a picture with the cracks? It matches my vibe. Sure, I said. Just don't scratch the seal. It was bedlam. Influencers were treating my driveway like a pilgrimage site. They were doing the renegade dance on the Chernobyl lime vein. They were laying down on the concrete to get the angle. Across the street, Brenda's house was under siege. Her driveway was blocked by a Subaru with a bumper sticker that said, "Eat the rich." She couldn't get out. I saw her peering through the blinds. She looked like a trapped animal. At noon, the news van arrived. Channel 4, Action News. A reporter with perfectly coiffed hair and a microphone jumped out. Her cameraman followed. They beelined for me. I was wearing my bathrobe, sunglasses, and Crocs. I realized, too late, that this was going to be my legacy. "Sir," the reporter called out. "I'm Jessica Day, Channel 4. Are you the artist behind this?" She gestured to the ground. "This statement piece?" I cleared my throat. I adjusted my sunglasses. I decided to lean in. "I am," I said, putting on my best tortured genius voice. "Can you tell us what inspired you? The HOA is calling it a visual hazard. Neighbors say it's an eyesore, but the internet is calling it a masterpiece." The camera zoomed in on my face. "Jessica," I said, "we live in a world of gray. We live in a world of conformity. The HOA wanted me to fill the cracks. They wanted me to hide the scars of this concrete, but I asked myself, why? Why hide the history? Why hide the pain?" I paused for effect. A hush fell over the crowd of TikTokers. "I filled these cracks with color," I continued, "because I believe that broken things can be beautiful. This isn't just a driveway. It's a manifesto. It's a cry for help against the beige tyranny of the suburban soul." "Wow," Jessica said. "And the glitter?" "The glitter," I said solemnly, "represents hope. And the rumors that you threatened to paint your house purple. I plead the fifth," I said, winking. The interview aired at 6:00 p.m. By 7 p.m., I had fan mail. By 8 p.m., I had a GoFundMe set up by a stranger to pay my HOA fines. It had already raised $6,000. But the real twist came on Saturday morning. A black town car pulled up. It navigated slowly through the crowd of tourists. A man in a very expensive suit got out. He looked like a shark that had learned to walk. He carried a briefcase. He walked up my driveway, ignoring the influencers. He knocked on my door. I opened it, expecting a lawsuit. "Mr. Miller?" he asked. "That's me." "I'm Gerald Thorne," he said. "I represent Oak Creek Development Corp., the original developers of this subdivision." "Am I being sued?" I asked. "No," Thorne said. He smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Can we talk?" We stood on the porch. "Mr. Miller," Thorne said, looking at the driveway, "you've caused quite a stir. This video, it's everywhere. Millions of views." "I didn't film it," I said. "I know, but people are watching it. And do you know what they are noticing besides the pretty colors?" "The glitter?" "No," Thorne said. They are noticing the cracks, the sheer number of cracks. He pulled out a tablet. He showed me a Reddit thread. Arsamter construction. Top comment. Yo, look at the spider webbing on that slab. That concrete was poured way too thin. No rebar. Terrible subgrade prep. That whole neighborhood is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Thorne sighed. You see, Mr. Miller, your art project has inadvertently highlighted a structural deficiency in our original pour. Engineers are weighing in online. They're saying the entire subdivision was built on shifting soil. So you are suing me, I said. God, no, Thorne laughed. If we sue you, we draw more attention to the bad concrete. We want this story to go away. We want the cracked driveway narrative to change. Change to what? To the generous developer narrative, Thorne said. He handed me a letter. We are announcing a voluntary recall. We are going to repave every driveway in Oak Creek Estates, free of charge. We're going to rip out the old thin slabs and pour thick reinforced concrete. It will cost us $2 million, but it's cheaper than a class action lawsuit for construction fraud. I stared at him. You're repaving the whole neighborhood? Yes, Thorne said. Everyone gets a brand new, perfect driveway. He looked down at my neon, glitter-filled masterpiece. Except you, Thorne added. Excuse me? Well, Thorne said, pointing to the inspection form I had from Tony, Section 5. According to your own inspection, your driveway is now structurally sound. It's rated for 10,000 psi. It's structural art. So we don't need to replace yours. You fixed it yourself. I grinned. So, I said, everyone else gets construction crews, jackhammers, dust, noise, for weeks. Exactly, Thorne said. And you get to keep this. And Brenda? I asked. Brenda gets a jackhammer? Brenda gets the first jackhammer, Thorne promised. Monday morning, 7 o'clock a.m. I shook his hand. Mr. Thorne, I said, pleasure doing business with you. He got back in his car. I looked across the street. Brenda was on her porch, looking at the black car. She looked worried. I waved. The viral fame would fade. The influencers would leave. But on Monday morning, the jackhammers would start. And while the rest of the neighborhood lived in a construction zone for the next month, I would be sitting on my lawn chair, sipping a cold drink, watching the sun set over my indestructible, rainbow-colored, GoFundMe-financed victory. I turned to the crowd of teenagers still dancing in my driveway. Who wants pizza? I yelled. It's on me! The cheer was deafening. Here is the final section of the story. The Oak Creek Community Center smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and suppressed rage. Usually the monthly HOA meetings were attended by 3 people. Brenda, the treasurer, a man named Bob, who slept with his eyes open, and Mrs. Higgins, who took minutes in a notebook she clearly used to encode government secrets. Tonight, however, it was standing room only. There were folding chairs set up in the hallway. There were people leaning against the vending machines. The cool dads, Rick, Dave, and a guy named Steve I'd never met but who was wearing a Margaritaville shirt, had formed a phalanx in the back row. Even the teenagers were there, live streaming the event on their phones. I sat in the front row. I was wearing a suit, not a business suit, a seersucker suit. I felt it conveyed the right mix of Southern gentleman and deranged plantation owner. At the head table sat the board. In the center sat Brenda Vance. She looked tired. The last week of construction noise, the sweet, sweet sound of jackhammers ripping up every driveway in the neighborhood except mine, had taken its toll. Her hair was slightly less aerodynamic than usual. Her lips were pursed so tightly they had virtually disappeared. She banged a wooden gavel on the plastic table. It sounded like a dry cough. "Order," she snapped. "I call to order the July meeting of the Oak Creek Estates Homeowners Association." The room quieted down, save for the distinct sound of Rick cracking open a sparkling water that everyone knew was actually a hard seltzer. "We have one item on the agenda tonight," Brenda said, her eyes locking onto mine like a predator drone. "The matter of the Miller residence, specifically the continued existence of the installation at 4492B. A murmur went through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "Keep the Rainbow Road!" Brenda hammered the gavel again. "Silence! The floor is not open for comments." She shuffled her papers. "Mr. Miller has been cited for multiple violations. Article 9, Aesthetics. Article 12, Light Pollution. Article 44, General Nuisance and Attracting of Internet Hooligans." She looked at me. "Mr. Miller, you have accrued fines totaling $14,000. The room gasped. 14 grand was a lot of money. It was a Honda Civic. It was a very nice outdoor kitchen. "However," Brenda continued, a cruel smile touching her lips, "the board is willing to waive these fines on one condition." She leaned forward. "You agree to the immediate removal of the epoxy. You agree to hire a contractor, at your own expense, since the developer's offer does not apply to you, to pour a standard gray, compliant driveway, and you agree to paint your house trim a sensible color. Say, colonial slate." I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. "Is it my turn?" I asked. "You have 5 minutes," Brenda said, checking her watch. "Make it quick." I walked to the podium. I adjusted the microphone. It squealed with feedback, piercing the ears of everyone in the first 3 rows. "Sorry," I said. "Technical difficulties. Much like the foundation of this neighborhood." A few chuckles. Brenda scowled. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, gripping the sides of the podium. "Neighbors, friends, people who are currently enjoying brand new, reinforced concrete driveways thanks to the panic I induced in the developers." I pointed to the back of the room. "You're welcome, by the way." A smattering of applause broke out. Even Mr. Henderson clapped, though he looked at Brenda while he did it, terrified. "Brenda wants me to fix my driveway," I continued. "She says it's broken. She says the cracks are ugly. She says the colors are a blight." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of gray concrete. I had picked it up from the debris of Brenda's own driveway demolition that morning. "This," I said, holding up the gray rock. "This is what Brenda wants. Uniformity. Sameness. Gray upon gray upon gray. She wants us to live in a world where nothing stands out, where nothing shines, where the only approved emotion is mild satisfaction regarding the lawn edging." I tossed the rock onto the table. It clattered next to Brenda's gavel. "But life isn't gray, is it?" I asked the room. "Life cracks. Marriages have cracks. Careers have cracks. Our patience with the guy who blows his leaves at 7 o'clock a.m. has cracks." I looked at Rick. He raised his seltzer in solidarity. "When I saw the cracks in my driveway, I didn't want to hide them," I said, my voice rising. "I wanted to honor them. I used the ancient art of kintsugi. I filled the voids with gold, with purple, with the kind of glitter that you find in a child's art project and never ever get out of your carpet." "Get to the point, Miles," Brenda hissed. "The point is this," I shouted. "The driveway is a metaphor. If we let the HOA dictate the color of our joy, If we let them legislate the brightness of our lives, then we are just inmates in a beige prison. You are breaking the bylaws, Brenda yelled, standing up. I am transcending the bylaws, I countered. And as for your fines, I reached into the inner pocket of my seersucker suit. I pulled out a check. It was a giant novelty check. I had had it printed at Kinko's an hour ago. It was 3 feet long. $14,000, I said. Paid in full. Courtesy of the Save the Rainbow Road GoFundMe, which, as of this afternoon, has raised $22,000. I slammed the giant cardboard check onto the table. It knocked over Brenda's water bottle. So I don't need your waiver, I said. And I don't need your permission. The fines are paid. The structure is sound. The lights are solar. I am compliant. Silence filled the room. Absolute, stunned silence. Then, slowly, from the back of the room, a slow clap started. Clap, clap, clap. It was Tony, the contractor. He was leaning against the doorframe, wearing a reflective vest. He's right, Tony rumbled. It's good epoxy. That broke the dam. I like the lights, Mrs. Higgins shouted from her seat at the treasurer's table. Brenda whipped her head around. Et tu, Gladys? It's festive, Mrs. Higgins defied her leader. It makes the street feel safer, and my grandkids love it. I like it too. Mr. Henderson stood up. His knees were shaking, but he was standing. It makes me smile. And frankly, Brenda, your hydrangeas are invasive. The room erupted. It was a rebellion. Years of suppressed grievances about trash can placement and mailbox paint colors came pouring out. The driveway stays, Rick chanted. Rainbow, rainbow, the teenagers chanted. Brenda stood there, surrounded by the mutiny. She looked at the giant check. She looked at Mrs. Higgins. She looked at me. She grabbed her gavel. She raised it high, intending to bring down the wrath of God. But she didn't bang it. She slowly lowered her hand. The fight went out of her. She slumped into her plastic chair. She looked small. Fine, she whispered. I can't hear you, I said. Fine, she screamed. Keep it. Keep the hideous thing. Let the property values plummet. Let the airplanes crash. I don't care anymore. She stood up, gathered her papers, and shoved them into her tote bag. I resign, she announced. The room went quiet again. I am selling the house, Brenda said. I am moving to Florida, to a gated community, with a gate guard, and strict rules, and where people respect the sanctity of beige. She marched out of the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. As she reached the door, she stopped and looked back at me. You missed a spot, she said. Where? I asked. By the curb, she sneered. It's chipping. And then she was gone. The party at my house that night was legendary. The cool dads brought a keg. The teenagers brought a Bluetooth speaker the size of a suitcase. Mrs. Higgins brought a potato salad that was actually quite good. We stood on the driveway. It was 10:00 p.m. The solar LEDs were set to victory loop, a dazzling display of gold and purple pulses. The glitter was reflecting the moonlight, the street lights, and the glow of the party. I stood in the center of the web, a beer in one hand, a half-eaten hot dog in the other. Sarah walked up to me. She was wearing sunglasses, even though it was night. It's bright, she said. It's magnificent, I said. You know, she said, looking down at the electric violence purple vein running between her feet. It is kind of mesmerizing. See? I nudged her. Wabi-sabi. Don't push it, Miles. You're still painting the shutters gray. We'll see, I said. I was thinking maybe a nice slate blue to pick up the accents. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. I looked across the street. Brenda's house was dark. The for sale sign wasn't up yet, but I knew it would be there by morning. Her driveway was a pit of gravel and dirt, waiting for the new concrete. Mine was complete. I crouched down and ran my hand over the surface. It was smooth. It was cool. It was hard as a rock. The cracks were still there, sure. They would always be there. Underneath the resin, the concrete was still broken. The foundation was still shifting. The earth was still moving. But now, they were the best part. I stood up, raised my beer to the neon-lit sky, and took a sip. "Tony!" I yelled over the music. "What do you think about glow-in-the-dark roof shingles?" Tony, who was currently teaching Mrs. Higgins how to do the wobble, gave me a thumbs up. "Do it," he mouthed. I smiled. Project Neon Roof was a go.